Hey Calibrating Tools family, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how to use a router. So stick around and I'll see you right after this. Okay, so this is a router, not the kind you have under your desk for your internet connection or your computer. This is a wood router, to be more specific, a plunge router, okay? So routers create patterns in wood. They also create various types of edges on your wood, right? So if you look on the edge of this whiteboard frame, you see that it's rounded out. That's because a router was used to create that rounded edge. You can also use a router to create patterns inside the edges of your workpiece or inside the confines of your workpiece. And we'll see how that's done in a minute. But first, let's go over the parts of the router and what they are. Okay, so on the sides of the router, you have these right here. Now, these are the handles that you use to grip the router while it's in operation, okay? So you just grip it while you move the router along its path. This is a variable speed router, and you can adjust the speed of the router motor right here with this dial on this model. Now, this transparent piece of plastic right here is called a chip shield. And like the name implies, it shields or protects you from any debris that's being expelled from the router this way, okay? So that's the chip shield. Now, you can take the chip shield off, and the way you do that is by depressing these tabs right here, these plastic tabs. You got one on this side, and you got another one on this side as well, all right? So you depress the tabs, and then you slide it this way, and you take it out. Now, while the chip shield is off, we can get a better look at this part right here. This very important part. That's called the collet nut. And the collet nut is where you would install your various types or different types of bits, depending on what kind of pattern you want to create in your wood, okay? So you would install, let's take a bit here. You would install this part of the bit, this shaft here, into the collet nut right here. Now, the diameter of this shaft is way too small for the diameter of the hole here in the collet nut that you would put it into. But they do provide you with an adapter that you can install into the collet nut like this. Okay? And then you can install your bit shaft into that adapter. Once you have it installed in there, then you want to tighten the collet nut. And to do that is by taking this wrench here, this tool that they also provide for you in the package to tighten the collet nut onto your bit. But to do that, it takes us to this part right here. This is called the spindle lock. This is a button right here on the router that you press in, and you spin the collet nut until it locks in place. Now you can tighten your collet nut. Okay? And the bit's not going anywhere. In order to loosen the collet nut so you can remove the bit, you just do the same thing. You press the spindle lock button down, right? And you take your wrench tool and you turn it counterclockwise. And then once your collet nut is loose, all you have to do is remove your bit or even your adapter if need be. Now, this is the on-off switch right here. Now, it is a corded router, but they do have cordless battery-powered routers as well. Now, this right here is called the plunge lock lever. So if you descend to a certain depth or plunge to a certain depth, you can lock that depth in by turning this lever counterclockwise to right about here. And it will stay at that depth. If you want to change that depth or unlock that position, you simply turn it clockwise and the router is adjustable again. Now, this portion of the router here is called the zero reset indicator. It allows you to make quick changes or slight adjustments to preset or existing depth of cut settings by using the scale here as a reference point. But how do you adjust the depth of your router in the first place before you even use the zero reset indicator? Well, the first thing you have to do when adjusting your router is to make sure that it's not connected to any power. In this case, you want to make sure that it's unplugged, or in the case of a battery-powered one, take the battery out. Then you want to raise the router by unlocking the plunge lock lever. And when you raise it, you want to make sure that the bit is inside the sub base of the router. This is the sub base right here. So let's look at it from this angle. The bit is inside the sub base. It can't be lower than the sub base. Now you have these hex nuts on this rod right here that prevents the router from rising anymore. So if you have to, make sure that these hex nuts are loosened and raised up, right? Unscrew them counterclockwise and raise them up so that the bit stays inside or rises above the plane of the sub base right here. Okay, you want to make sure that the router is on a flat surface, and then you want to lower the router until the bit barely touches the surface. And then you lock it in. That very small distance from the bit to the surface is considered a zero depth of cut that the router is now in. Now you want to lower these hex nuts until they touch this right here. This is called the stop flange. This makes sure that the router stays at zero depth of cut at all times, that it doesn't rise above it. So we're going to bring the nuts down until they touch the stop flange, and you want to make sure that both nuts, there are two of them, you want to make sure that they are tightly secured against each other. So we're going to take a wrench here and make sure that the nuts are tightened against each other. Now this knob right here on the base of the router is called the depth stop, okay? It's also called the micro adjustable depth stop. Every 90-degree turn of this knob can change your depth about a 64th of an inch. One full turn of the knob, that's 360 degrees, will mean a 16th of an inch change in your depth. So once you set the depth stop where you want it, you want to lower the stop bar, okay? That's this right here. And you do that by loosening the stop bar lock knob. And you see how it just fell and touched that? You want it to touch the depth stop knob because now the router won't go lower than you want it to go. So the lower your depth stop, the deeper you go. The higher your depth stop, the more shallow you cut. But the stop bar also determines that as well. The higher the stop bar, the deeper you go. The lower the stop bar, the more shallow your depth. Now back to the zero reset indicator. You can also use the marks on this scale as reference points to how far down or deep you want to go. So you can slide the stop bar, and if you see this red line here, you can align that with the 1 inch mark, the 2 inch mark, or any increment on this scale as a reference point. Or let's just say you want to go about 3/4 of an inch deep into your material. You can take a piece of material around your shop or wherever that's about 3/4 of an inch, like this board here. Put it right there between the depth stop and the stop bar. Tighten the lock knob. And then you got about 3/4 of an inch depth. If you want to go about 1/8 of an inch deep, you can take something that's about 1/8 of an inch, like this wrench here. Lock that in. And you're gonna go down about 1/8 of an inch. We're gonna use a 1/2 inch round over bit. I don't know if you guys can see it in there, but it looks like this, okay? Looks like that. We're gonna use that to round off the edge of this piece of lumber here, okay? So the first thing we wanna do is make sure that we place a guide onto the workpiece, okay? And we're gonna use this guide as a straight edge as we come down the piece of lumber here. So we're just gonna clamp this down, and we wanna make sure that the guide is parallel to the edge. And if you notice on the back portion of the sub base, it's a straight edge, right? And you can use the straight edge portion of the sub base on the router to put against the straight edge guide on your workpiece. And you can also use the straight edge guide to align the bit with the edge of your workpiece and make a mark where the straight edge guide is on the sub base. And you can move the straight edge guide on your workpiece to that mark and lock it in. Now, you don't want to force the router. You may have to make several passes before you get your desired result, okay? Now, that was an example of outside routing because we routed on the outside of the workpiece, okay, on the edge. But how do you route something inside the confines or the edges of your workpiece? That's called internal routing, and we're going to look at how you do that. For the internal routing, we're going to use a straight bit. It looks like this. So for internal routing, you want to take your router and place it on your workpiece at an angle. You can even use the straight edge of the subplate or the sub base to place on your workpiece, okay? And then you want to make sure that the router is running at full speed. And then you want to lower it slowly into your workpiece until it's level with the workpiece. So it would look like that. And the bit will be perpendicular to your workpiece. Look at that mess. There you go, guys. Now, routers are pretty fascinating tools, aren't they? You can do a lot of creative things with them. Hey, if I were you, I'd go out and get one too. Hey, if you like what you saw and got any value from it, hit the share button, hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.